this thing on? Testing. Okay. So the beautiful thing about testimonies is they tell of God's goodness. And they tell about the character of God. And the character of God, how he interacts with me, the goodness, his character. Every time someone shares a testimony, it's declaring who God is over your life as well. So in the Bible, you hear the crazy encounters and the crazy things God did. Well, that's God's character. And the beautiful thing is God's character doesn't change. It doesn't change. And so today I'm going to share a testimony that God is real and he's alive. And he's a redeemer and he's someone who loves deeply. So my story begins on a snowy day in December in Michigan. I was traveling home after I dropped my sister off, and I was traveling home with my little sister, 3-year-old sister, and was really tired from the week before. So after I dropped my sister off, driving my dad's pickup truck, I forgot to put our seatbelts on, which is a big no-no, you know. The weather was really bad, and I was just like, I just need to get home. And I remember driving really slow. So as I was driving over this hill, and the front tire, as we got to the top, hit ice, and we started sliding over into the next lane. And right away, I mean, if any of you guys been in an accident, it like freaks you out. And it's like, and I was like, Jesus, help me. Started screaming, Jesus, help me. And then my back tire hit ice, and it flipped us around. And we started spinning, and there was a car coming. And I knew that we were losing control, that this wasn't going to be something that I could, you know, sometimes you can get it back out, get it back over the side. I knew that wasn't going to happen. So I grabbed my little sister, and we flipped. We started flipping, and I remember it was like slow motion. Everything was in slow motion, and I remember seeing the car that was coming drive by us, and it didn't stop. And we were flipping off a hill. So we were airborne, we flipped twice, and we rolled. And as soon as we started rolling, I remember very little about that. I don't know where my little sister was. Like all of a sudden, she wasn't in my arms anymore. I remember sliding towards the door. She should have been smashed. So in that moment, we started flipping. I felt something hit me. Could have been one of the tools in my dad's truck. Who knows? There's probably lots of random things. Could have been when we had impact. I'm not sure. But all of a sudden, something hit me really hard. And all of a sudden, I felt myself go limp. And I felt myself, like, floating away from my body. Conrad talks about that, like, experience that, and it was death. And in that moment, it's like, I'm going to die. I'm going to die, and I'm like, wow, I wonder what this is going to be like. Like, I'm experiencing this right now. Just to let you know, you can still, like, process things when the, like, crazy situations are happening. So I remember right away, I was like, I wonder what Jesus is going to look like. Like, how's he going to greet me? Is he going to, like, run up and hug me? Like, what's his face going to look like? And I was excited, and all of a sudden, right then I heard the audible voice of God. He said, no, Tiara, you're not going to die. I still have plans for your life. And then in that moment, I had visions of people praying. I had no idea what that meant. I just remember seeing pictures of people praying. And this is all kind of when I'm out. I came to, and we were in a field. And all I knew is that it was dark, it was snowing, and we were alone. Or so I thought. And I could hear my little sister crying. She was 3, and I couldn't go to her because I was pinned beneath the vehicle. And this is the worst feeling when you know that a child is crying and you can't go to them. And there's nothing you can do about it. In that moment, I remember it's like the most helpless situation. You got nothing. And so I laid under there, and I remember right then in the moment, I started crying out. I said, God, help me. Jesus, help me. That song, what a beautiful name it is. It's probably one of my favorite songs this year. Because death cannot hold him. There's no equal. Nothing can overtake the plans of God. And so I woke up underneath that in that moment, crying out, God, help me. God, help me. Jesus, help me. Just started screaming Jesus' name. And I couldn't breathe very well. My lungs had collapsed. My neck was broken. The bottom of my skull was broken. My ribs were broken. I didn't know this at that point, but I couldn't feel anything. I was in shock. Lots of internal bleeding. from my lungs being collapsed and some torn organs and different things like that. And my nerve bundle here, I can't remember the name of it, it's a long, complicated name. It was damaged as well, so I couldn't move my arm. And so all I knew, though, at that point was that I couldn't breathe. And also my carotid artery was torn. Carotid artery is the vessel that goes to your heart, to your brain. And there's like 3 layers. So I had there's like 3 layers. There's like 2 harder layers and like a soft fleshy layer outside that just kind of like holds it. And those 2 hard layers were like all that was holding it together was this very soft outside layer. And if my heart pressure would have gone up at all, I would have died right away. So I'm laying there, I have no idea actually what's wrong with me. I just kind of know that I know that I can't breathe, and then I'm choking up all this stuff, and so crying out to God, like black out again from lack of breath. And in that moment, I heard God's audible voice again, this gently fatherly voice, most loving voice, tender and compassionate. And he read to me Psalms 23. The Lord is my shepherd, in him I lack nothing. That stood out to me the most. I lack nothing. And I remember I was laying there, and after he read it to me, it was crazy because, like, you talk about peace that surpasses all understanding. It just, like, overwhelmed me. It was like it flooded me. And I came to, and my iPad, this is the reason I brought it up. So my iPad was on the dash of our truck, and it came, and it fell out. In the accident, my ear was also damaged. Glass, I hit my head on something, it cut out part of my ear, and then God healed my hearing. But all that to say is I couldn't hear in the accident, and couldn't hear at all. And so my iPad fell out, and it fell right beside the other ear. And landed perfectly set up like this. It was just kind of weird. And it started playing worship music. And part of my testimony comes from songs, because that's what led me to know the good character of God, to know who he is. I experienced his heart through worship. And so as I was laying there, the interesting thing was it wasn't just any particular worship songs. It was a song by Bryce Anderson's How We Love. And it's based off Psalms 23. And so as I was laying there and I couldn't do anything, God was with me. God was with me. He never leaves us nor forsakes us. And in our darkest points, that's when we get to see the light the brightest. That's when we get to see the power of God, because we recognize our need for him. We get to recognize our need for him, and then we receive, because we never receive if we don't recognize a need. So it was, it started playing, and it was, oh, how we love Jesus. And as those words are going over, and it said, you are enough for me. You are enough. And I lack nothing in you. Those aren't exactly the words, but the context of that. And I couldn't do anything, but I was laying there. And I remember the things that was interesting. I was like, God, you said, I started like crying. I was like, God, you said I lack nothing in you, I lack nothing I need, and I kind of need my air. I kind of need to breathe. And so I was like, God, you said that I lack nothing I need, and I need to breathe. I know that because you put that in me. And so I remember crying that out. And then when I kind of blacked out again, came to, and there was a guy kneeling praying for me. It was a police officer. And so, yeah, it's pretty cool. So he's kneeling praying for me, and I could hear at that point, the first responders had come. I have a big heart for first responders now. And I remember the biggest thing for me in that moment was my little sister's cry. I could tell it wasn't a hurt cry. If you hear children crying, you can generally tell if it's like I'm scared or I'm hurt. And my little sister, I could tell it was I'm just scared. And I just knew she was okay. And so I remember that point, they were trying to call in a helicopter, but the weather was so bad, they couldn't. So they didn't even realize what was all wrong with me because everything was internal. They knew I couldn't breathe and they knew I couldn't move my arm, but they just figured it was broken. They would have, I remember the EMT guy was like, if we would have known your carotid artery, so we would have freaked out. But so they didn't know a lot of those things. They just knew I kept saying, I can't breathe. And so they got me in the ambulance, and me and my little sister in the ambulance. And the interesting thing, so it took us an hour to get to the hospital. And instead of I thought it was 5 minutes because they put me on meds and put me out. But so it was an hour to the hospital. I should have died. There's so many times I should have died. I should have died from where my skull was broken because right behind there's a nerve for breathing. And usually if someone breaks one side, you die. I broke both sides. And my lungs, I should have died from not having air. But I didn't. I should have died from the carotid artery. But I didn't. Because God's greater than death. He's greater than any of our fears. He's greater. And we recognize that. We receive it. So, we're in the ambulance. We get there, and I remember we got to the emergency room, even though, because at that point I was on meds, so, and so but I do remember, them saying all the things that were wrong with me. And I was like, but I remember, instead of freaking out, I was just I had this peace, because, probably some things I forget to mention, but when I was laying there, Psalms 23, he had said, you're not going to die, and I'm going to restore you as if you were never in an accident. And I remember when I was laying there, that song kept coming through my mind of, in you I lack nothing. And I thought about, they had put a vent in me in the ambulance, so I could breathe at that point. And so I was like, I'm good, I can breathe. And so they're saying all these things wrong with me, she has internal bleeding. I was like, ooh, that's not good. I remember watching that in a movie and the guy died. And so I was like, that's not good. And they were saying some other things, and I was like, well, most of the things I was like, I don't even know what that is because I didn't like health class. I thought it was gross. So, but there was some things I was like, that's not good. So I was laying there, but I remember I was like, you know what? God said I'm going to live. I'm going to live. And he provided my breath. He is going to give me everything else I need. And just an overwhelming peace. He gave me strength that goes beyond my understanding. And so I was in there, and I remember that I was really thirsty because lack of blood. And so I remember trying to sign language to them, just so you know, doctors cannot read sign language, that I wanted a drink of water. And so it's something like this, but my thing, they thought I was trying to pull the vent out of my throat. So they're like, strap her down. And I was like, I'm claustrophobic. I was like, no, I just want water. So they strapped me down, and I was trying it, and I was like, okay, they can't read sign language. And so they're like, I think she's trying to sign to us. I was like, yeah. And anyway, but that point is a really specific point, because I motioned that I wanted to write. And that later played into a lot of things because I wrote down my story to so many people again and again. It made me remember it. I would have probably forgotten it. But also a very key point is I'm allergic to codeine. It makes so I can't breathe very well. Not a good thing when you're going to go into surgery. It's a pain medication. It's typically in a lot of the higher pain medications as well. So they had asked me if I was allergic to something, and of course I said yes because I couldn't really process very well. And I was like, wait, no, I'm not allergic to that. And so I wrote down yes, and I was like, no. And then they're like, are you allergic to any other medications? And I was like, I can never remember. Before the accident, I just had this brain block, and I could not remember the word codeine. I would always be like, hey, Mom, what am I allergic to again? And in that moment, I was like, okay, God, you can give this to me. God, what am I allergic to? I know it's something that starts with a C. And God's like, codeine. And I was like, oh, yeah. So I wrote codeine down, and because of that, doctors didn't have to worry about me randomly not breathing. And which is really cool to me, how God provided that for me. Yeah. So after that, I was rushed into surgery, because a 6 or 7 hour surgery. And the doctor said that usually they don't do surgeries hardly ever in the carotid artery because no one makes it to the hospital. And it took me an hour to get to the hospital. And so the surgery I had was also very risky. I should have died within the surgery. There's a lot of areas I should have died. But God's plans always prevail. Like when God puts something in action, it always happens because he's good.
Amen.
He never goes back on his word because he doesn't lie to us. He can't. It's not in his character. So obviously from that, I came back into the ICU after that, and that was very foggy to me. A lot of people visit me. I don't really remember them at all. And but after that, it was a big process. It was a journey, as some people like to put it, because when it came to, that was crazy because I've never experienced that kind of pain before. But the crazy thing is, when you have God, you don't even see the pain. When you have God, you can focus on one thing. And when you focus on him, all else fades away. You know that song, it says, turn your eyes upon Jesus, and all else is going to fade away. When you turn your eyes on Jesus, all else fades away. The cool thing is, though, you just ask him. Sometimes it's like, I can't do this, God. I literally cannot turn my eyes on you. Like, it's so painful. God's so merciful, and he'll tip your chin up and help you look at him because he so longs for us to know him. He's so merciful, and he's so compassionate. And it says in the Bible, if you call to me, I will answer, and I'll come to your rescue. If you call, he will come to your rescue, and he will show his great strength and power. He always does. And so after that was maybe a week and a half in the ICU. Right after I came out of the surgery, I actually had internal bleeding. And again, I was bleeding a lot. And they just had tubes coming out of me, and all this blood was coming out, and they just had to be putting blood in me. And I remember the exact amount of blood that I had to go through, but there was a lot. And so at that point, I remember my dad, the nurse were like, okay, we're going to have to take her back into surgery. And my dad, my mom they text. At that point, my parents were there during the surgery. They were waiting, and they text people and to start praying. And as soon as people started praying, my internal bleeding stopped. And I didn't have to go back into surgery, which I'm glad for because being stretched open once is not fun. I don't want to be stretched open twice. So I was laying in, I remember ICU, experienced crazy things about God's heart because he was really near to me. God's near to the brokenhearted. He doesn't distance himself when we're in pain. In fact, he's constantly pursuing us and drawing us near. In the verse in Isaiah, it's interesting. It says, in one translation, it says, I longed or I ached to hold you, to gather you under my wings like a hen, something like that. But the interesting thing is that last part. It says, but you were not willing. God is always willing to hold us close, to feel our aches, to pity us, but we are not willing because we were never meant to do anything alone. When we were created to be with God and to do things with God. We were never created to walk something alone. Amen. That's when you start doubting God, is when you're doing it alone. Amen. So when you start doubting to God, think about, okay, God, am I doing this with you? It's all about doing with God. It's important to know that he wants to do it with you. He didn't create you to be alone. And so after that was a lot of different things that happened in the hospital, a lot of times where it was just breaking down, like, oh my goodness, God, I can't do this after all. And God would come and he would just give me peace. I know there was one day I couldn't keep any food down. It hurt to throw up. I couldn't breathe very well. Crazy thing is also God fights for us. There were so many people praying for me. God fights for us. It's important for us to know that. He's fighting for us, When you don't see it, doesn't mean he's not. Because he'll wake people up in the middle of the night and pray for you. Because he fights for us. He can never go back on his character. His character never changes. So when you don't see it, it doesn't mean it's not happening.
That's right.
I know this. I'm going to share differently with my hand and my arm because there was times where I didn't see it, but it was happening. So I didn't really notice my arm. I just know sometimes they come up to me like, oh, I'm so sorry, you can't move your arm. And I was like, it wasn't like, oh, your arm, just keep trying to move it. It was like, your arm's probably never going to move again. Like, they didn't want to tell me though because I was dealing with all this other pain. And so my family was really supportive, always there for me, loving, and crazy how every time God would give me songs during this time and help me to turn my eyes on Jesus. And it was crazy how I experienced the throne room of God, experienced the presence of God, how special to be. The presence of God is really just like, it's interesting. That word in the Greek just means like the face of God. So like getting to see, like be close to God, seeing him, being there. And so he was really close and I got to experience him in a really special way. But anyway, so got moved out. I remember there was this one point when I was out of ICU and actually in the ICU, there's another point. I'll go there first. Yep. There's me. So, there was one point, I remember, there was something that was either just something that I couldn't do, and I remember it was something that needed to be done. So, and I was like, God, he's like, I'm going to heal this. And I was like, God, I don't even have the faith. I want to believe you, but I can't. Like, I want to believe you, though, God, but it's something in my heart. Like, I want to have the faith. And God said, I remember he was like, because he wanted me to wait for it. And he was like, take the action of waiting, and your heart will follow. Your heart will follow your action, and it will believe. And so I sat there, and I was like, fine, I'm going to sit here till forever, until whatever happens. And it's crazy. And he gave me a prayer, and aligning my body with what God wants to do. And the moment was healed from that. So, yeah, it's crazy how merciful and compassionate God is. He's not like, oop, you missed it. God's not like that. That's why he made the sunset. Because God made the sunset. We always talk about the sunrise, and I love the sunrise. Well, kind of. Sometimes I don't really see it because I don't get up. But that's why I love the sunset, because God is so merciful. If you miss the first masterpiece, the first showing of his beauty and his love, he gives it to you again. So merciful and so compassionate. Like, look how great the mercy of God is. His mercy, that's why David said, oh, your unfailing love, God. It wasn't like he was like, oh yeah, unfailing love. No, he knew it. Yeah. He knew that it wasn't unfailing. So there was one point, I was moved out of the ICU, and I was in the hospital. I remember we were in a different room, and couldn't do, there's crazy things it's crazy how much you can forget in a day. Like, I forgot how to swallow, I forgot to drink water, drink out of a straw, like, how to walk. Like, there's a lot of things. Your body's just like, oh, I guess we don't need that anymore. Like, it's kind of sad. But, so, I had to relearn a lot of things. But it's crazy because the process is beautiful when you realize he's with you. Like, when you realize that God's for you, that he's not against you, that's what makes the process beautiful. Because then you learn to see the beauty in the process. And the truth is, there's beauty in every season. Because when God's in our seasons, there's beauty. God is just full beauty. And so when you learn to see God in your situations, you'll see the beauty in your situations. And all of a sudden, everything fades away, and you can live in victory. So we were in there. I remember this one time, that point, I also started realizing, I was like, wow, I can't move my arm. It's really weird not to be able to move your arm. And I have nerve damage, and I was like, oh, I couldn't even I couldn't move anything. And I had, and I remember the nurse came in, and she said, you're probably never going to move your arm again. And I was like, oh, God, you said you was going to, I didn't say this, but I was like, God, you said you were going to fully heal me. but the doctor just said that I'm probably never going to move my arm again. But, sorry, I had to do that. But anyway, so I sat there, and I remember she went out, and I was just like, it hit me. Because, like sometimes you're like, yeah, this is going to happen because you don't see all the little facts in life. And all of a sudden, whoa, they just said it's not going to. This is impossible. And I remember, I was like, God, and he said, I remember he came to me and he gave me a song about surrender. It's interesting. But he said, surrender what you think it needs to look like, because then you'll take on my expectation. And so I remember I was like singing there, and I raised my hand. I was like, God, I don't believe this, but I'll try. And I remember it's like, someday I'm going to hold up both hands. Someday, and all worship's like the greatest to hold both hands up. But I remember God said to me, I was on a mission trip to Germany at one point, and at that point, God had given me a vision, and he told me to learn guitar. And I was like, I don't want to learn guitar. So last summer, I started learning guitar. Anyway, so in the hospital at that moment, God came and reminded me of that. He's like, Tiara, I told you to learn guitar. And he's like, and you can't play guitar with one hand. And so I knew, I was like, you know what, God, you never lie to me. You won't lie to me. Because God's not a deceiver. And I know that God is real. I've seen crazy things that have happened in my life to show that God is real. Crazy things. And you know what? The cool thing about that is that means God's real. And so that means that everything that he is, everything he says he is who he is.
That's right.
He is everything. And him showing himself real is how we get to realize that. And so in the hospital for long, there's a lot of different things in that a lot of crazy things that were hard, but again, God was with me, and he would come speak to me, and he would speak through other people. He'd bring people into my life. He uses the body of Christ to show himself clear.
Amen.
So never be afraid to be vulnerable with others, with the body of Christ. And so, So from that moment, when I got home, it was still at the hospital, I remember someone came and prayed for me, one of my friends, and it was that point I started moving my hands, and the doctor's like, well, you're only going to move your hand. And then move my elbow. You're only going to move your elbow. And so when I got home, when I started going to physical therapy and different things like that, it's crazy what, just time out. You get to hear crazy things from God. You get to just spend time with God. It's one of the best things. Anyway, so I was going to physical therapy, and I remember my physical therapist was kind of like an agnostic, maybe kind of believed in God, but didn't really think he was very real, or didn't care, more like that. And so, because I remember telling him my story, he didn't think it was really true. But, anyway, but I remember I knew that God was going to heal my hand, but I laid down my expectation of what I thought it should look like so that he could fulfill what he wants it to do. So there was one point in a lot of pain at that time, and my church was having revival meetings, and God told me to go to them. I was like, oh my goodness, do you know how painful it is to ride in a car, God? And he's like, but I'm asking to you, and you know that every time I'm leading to something, it's to experience my goodness. And he's like, and I'm going to heal you there. And I was like, I'm going to heal your arm there. And I was like, I can't believe that. I was like, how am I supposed to believe that? He's like, take the action, and your heart will follow. So I remember going, and it was a 3-day thing. So I went, and I remember, every time I was like, well, there was at that point, my hand, if you see pictures on Facebook, my hand was crippled. It started bending back like this, and all kinds of, it was really weird shaped, but because my muscles weren't my nerves weren't telling the muscles to move. Anyway, so I was my therapist had told me the day before went to the revival meetings, he's like, you're probably going to have to wear a cast on your hand the rest of your life, because if you don't, your hand is going to slowly back, and it's going to break those ligaments, and it's going to cripple, and it's going to cause a lot more damage. And again, I went to God, it's like it's hard to believe when things like that happen. But God's merciful, and he's compassionate. And when you can't do it, he carries you, and he tips your chin back up. He realigns you. He's so merciful, so compassionate. Such a good father. So we went, and I went, and I remember every night, and I was like, okay, I remember there was that song, "You Are Good, and You're Never Gonna Let Me Down, God. You're not gonna let me down, God." And standing there, and I remember the last night, people gathered around me, were praying for me, and then they started leaving. I was like, no, keep praying until it happens. I don't want this. I want it to be healed. God said so. And then they prayed for a long time, and then they started leaving, and I was looked at my hand, and it looked the exact same. And I was like, God, you said you were going to heal me. He said, Tiara, I never lied to you. I never lied to you. Lay down your expectations so you can take on mine. So I laid down what I thought it should look like, and I was like, okay. And he said, I healed you. Walk out in it. So I was like, okay, you healed me. And so that week, my hand came back to normal.
Come on.
And so nerves, it's interesting. Nerves take a little bit. He brought life back to dead nerves, because he can resurrect anything. So he resurrected my nerves, and so now I can move my hand. I can play piano again, learning guitar again. But we sing that song, Redeemer. It's so beautiful. God took all of the ashes, everything the enemy meant for evil, he meant it for good. He can turn anything that the enemy brings against you and bring beauty from it. He always does. And then the enemy's sitting there like, oh, whoops, why did I do that? So, but the beautiful thing is, God's a redeemer, and there's no situation that he does not want to redeem. He's passionate about redeeming. And if you can look at your situation and you're saying, God, you don't want to redeem this, that's a lie. Because God's a redeemer, and you simply need to recognize that you're not alone in it, that God wants to redeem it. I feel like there's going to be some specific things in your guys' lives that he wants to redeem. And he wants to resurrect. He wants to resurrect them back to life. But lay down your expectation and take on his. Because then you're willing to go through the process because you trust him. And remember that his mercy is so great and he's so compassionate. If you miss it the first time, he will give it to you again.